There's a couple of us still missing. I know the mayor is going to be a little bit late, and I don't know. I think Commissioner Pepcorn's in the building somewhere, but we'll go ahead and get started. The purpose of this meeting is to basically connect with the person who's our lobbyist, Terry, and get an update. So, Michael, I think you're going to introduce her.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Preston, and Commissioners, good afternoon. I will provide a brief introduction to our presenter today. First, I just want to acknowledge that we really are at the halfway point. The legislative session resumes tomorrow on Wednesday, March 1. And so there's been a lot of activity already in the number of legislative days that have already occurred out in Bismarck. And so Terry today is going to provide just a high level, I'll call it a crossover report. We're really reserving this time to do a joint session with Cass County and West Fargo that will be rescheduled to a different time after the close of the session. So what we wanted to do today was certainly still take advantage of the opportunity with Terry in town and traveling back through Fargo on our way to Bismarck this afternoon, just to provide kind of an insider's view of what's been going on out in Bismarck, and then talk about next steps and where we go from here. The League of Cities has not had their weekly updates over the last couple of weeks, and so what we're going to do today is to share some update on some information that is more recent, a little bit more kind of the here and now that's happened this week. I printed for your benefit just the committee hearings that start up again tomorrow when the session resumes on March 1 and takes us through Friday, just to kind of show you and illustrate some of the bills that are up. A couple of items that I'll just highlight. House Bill 1438 has to deal with charitable institutions and their level of exemptions that they receive if you have a large property, for example. That bill could mean that you could have up to 50 acres of property, and if you're charitable, that you could be exempt. We're also looking at House Bill 1495, some just conversation that was occurring before our session here this afternoon. We're going to continue to monitor that. And then, of course, the one that we're really waiting for that is not scheduled at this time is House Bill 1273. And 1273 is our prohibition bill on ranked choice voting as well as approval voting. And so as soon as we see that come before the Senate Judiciary Committee, we will be ready with fresh testimony. There's been some suggestions for some revisions to our testimony that we've also offered to the House Political Subdivisions Committee. And so that will also be in the hopper, as well as new testimony that we submit. So really today is just to try and answer questions of the commission. If you have specific questions, Terry is our subject matter expert. She's there day to day, seeing it and really leading and helping the Olson Efforts team on all things legislative. So I will leave it at that. So I'll have Terry provide some comments. I am also happy to look up bills that if you think of one as we're talking, I'm happy to look up if there's a question about status. I've got the laptop opened up, and we can certainly look anything up if there are other specific items of interest. And then again, our legislative event, we will reschedule that for another time at the close of session. We still want to have a larger gathering with our legislative delegation from Fargo, West Fargo, and Cass County. We'll find a time that works better for individuals. Many were traveling over the crossover break. Many were also just unavailable. So we will certainly reschedule that, but look forward to getting an update today. And I'll introduce Terry Efforts. Terry will join us at the podium. So thank you very much for your time today. We do appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Michael. Again, Terry Efforts, thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and give you guys a halftime report. I am not as talented as Rihanna is, but I'm going to do my best to give you an overview here. We started out this session with about 100 bills less than we did last session. Last session, we came in around 1,050, and we were around 950 this session, which was surprising to a lot of people. With this many freshmen coming in, a lot of us, myself included, thought we would see some more policy bills that maybe were repeats and things of that nature, but we didn't. So we were pleasantly surprised when we came in about 100 bills lower. Since that point, the legislature has disposed of about 200 of those bills. So we're starting the second half with 750 bills approximately, give or take 5. We've seen some bad bills defeated. The old adage that the Senate is the sensible chamber does seem to be holding true. Some of those bills that have gotten to the Senate have been thoughtfully considered and disposed of, but we've seen some things sneak by as well. Right before crossover, which the Senate finished on Tuesday, the majority leader, Senator Hogue, mentioned that he would like to be on to conference committees by the 59th legislative day, which is a very ambitious plan that they are trying to save quite a few days. And there is a lot of thought and speculation that this is a lead up to annual sessions, that they're going to try and test this out and save enough days that they can practice having this. There is a bill out there for annual sessions as well, or a resolution. There is a proposal out there for annual sessions, so we'll see where that ends up after we start the second half here as well. The 59th legislative day would put us at approximately April 6th. Right now we're scheduled to go until the end of April, but April 6th is when Leader Hogue would like to see us enter into conference committees. And in an effort to help them save legislative days, this week they are not actually gaveling in on the floor. So Wednesday through Friday, or they will gavel on Friday, excuse me, but tomorrow and Thursday, they are just doing hearings all day long. This first couple of weeks post-crossover, they are going to hear any policy bills that have an appropriation attached, because they will then have to be re-referred to the Appropriations Department. So I'm sure, as you all know, that if it has any sort of money attached, it gets 2 hearings. It'll go to the Policy Committee and then to the Appropriations Committee as well. There are quite a few different hot topics out there that are still being considered and discussed at length. There are several groups of what we refer to. We've got the eminent domain bills. That's a large group of bills. Several of them have been changed into studies, triggers for extra money that comes out. There are the library bills. Those are 2 bills that are being discussed heavily as well. And this is an interesting situation we find ourselves in with the library bills, for example, because one started on the House side and one started on the Senate side. And so this always leaves a little bit of jockeying back and forth about who's going to hear which bill first in which chamber. And then you really have to keep an eye on it, because if one bill gets killed, oftentimes some of the language can get amended into the bill that's still alive. So when you've got something that's going in opposing chambers, you really got to keep an eye on them just to see where things end up. So eminent domain, library bills, transgender bills, board bills. So what I mean about board bills is a direct impact on workforce development. There are several bills out there that would transform the way that licensure happens in the state. So for your attorneys and your addiction counselors and your social workers and your plumbers and anybody who has a professional license, there's a big effort out there to revamp how that system works as well. And so we've seen quite a few bills on that. As Michael mentioned as well, there are some bills that are coming out this week that we're keeping an eye on. 1495, which is the tax incentive bills, of 1438, the charitable institutions. And then the big one is 1273 with the ranked choice and approval voting. This bill was amended to have the kind of the grandfather date in there, and then that amendment was stripped off and it was passed quick, right on the floor like that. So that is something that the city is very concerned about. And to be frank, the Senate Judiciary Committee is not going to be the most friendly for our point of view in that matter. There are a lot of legislators in that committee that are probably on the opposite side of our viewpoint when it comes to that. So with that brief introduction, this is kind of a learning session for both of us. I can't tell you exactly how every bill is going to end up because, of course, we're only at halftime, but I would love to hear any questions, thoughts, concerns, observations, or anything from you guys.
Go ahead.
Mayor, go ahead.
I think Arlette had a question, so go ahead.
Oh, no. Anybody have a question? I don't.
Sure, this is Denise. So can you share a little bit more about the library bills and where they are as far as the content and the ramifications of those and the implications to this, for instance, the city library?
So there's been a lot of speculation, not only about the impact for city libraries, institutional libraries, but there are some rumblings that there is actually going to be some commercial implications as well. And so I didn't make this contact, but I've been told through my sources that people like Barnes & Noble and retailers are also concerned about these bills. And so we're going to see the opposition to them ramp up. And that, I mean, that is something you see a lot when it comes to these policy bills. A lot of people wait for the first half to get over and to see what gets killed. And then they ramp up and they start with their resources. And then you'll actually see the full implication and the full opposition to a bill like this once it gets past that first half. So with the library bills, this is one that, you know, everybody, including the guy who has to sign it at the end of the day, was probably hoping would die before it got to crossover. And so that's where we're at this point. But I know for a fact that some larger national corporations are going to be coming in on the second half. Right now, as it stands, and let me bring up the most recent version here.
Do you have any idea of how many states this is going on? I'm assuming we're not the only one.
You are not, yeah, North Dakota is definitely not the only one. I've read an article about 2 other states, but I don't know if this was model language that came down. Just from reading through the headlines, that I know a couple of other more conservative states are absolutely going through the same exercise. I believe it was one of the southern states already disposed of the issue. And I read a humorous anecdote about somebody coming in and reading some of the most risque passages from Shakespeare during their committee hearing. And so that was just, you know, hey, you know, this does showcase what sexual intercourse would be. And so, but it's Shakespearean. And so they were able to dispose of it that way. There was an amendment on 1205, and this is the one that was sponsored by LaFleur and Steiner. And so if there's something else we got to consider is the fact that the leader is a prime sponsor of this bill. It makes everybody sit up a little straighter and actually take notice of what's going on. This one does have to do with the public libraries. And so it would codify something that's already happening in all of these libraries. Every library out there has a system and a policy in place to actually vet the content that's going in and for the removal and disposal of materials that are not appropriate. And so this bill is duplicating that process in state code instead. Several proponents say that this is needed because of all this material that's coming in that's impacting our children. And then, of course, the opposition is saying this already exists. You know, where's the examples of this happening in North Dakota? And there really haven't been a lot. The other thing that this would do, which is quite onerous, is make each public library prepare compliance reports for legislative management before May of next year. So they would have basically a year to go through and vet all of their materials and then submit that report. And so not every library out there has a great big budget that they can go ahead and put together a special project like this and to vet all the materials. So that's something that several public libraries, especially a lot of the smaller ones, are concerned about. 2360 is the other library bill. Also amended. Let me bring up the newest version here. And this one immediately causes red flags because they've got my favorite word as an attorney, reasonable. So, I mean, it's so hard to determine what a reasonable adult would think, because what I think is different from what Commissioner Preston would think, which is different from what a judge would think in an adjudicative proceeding. So, must be judged with reference to reasonable adults. So that should be very clear cut for everybody. This one also addresses the display to minors as well. And it duplicates a lot of the same material and the basically the test for what that material could include: sexual intercourse, sadomasochism, sexual activity. And so, like I said before, since 2 of these are coming up through each chamber, it's likely that at least one of them will die. Hopefully 2 of them, but it's likely that one of them will be disposed of because there's no sense in having both of these bills run through the end. The difference about this one is that it actually touches on the technology protection measures that are required within schools. And this is interesting because it obviously, you know, schools have a right to prohibit that type of material from being viewed on a device in the school system. But it oftentimes policing that can become an issue. And then if something does get through, is it on the individual looking it up? Is it on this person supervising it? Is it on the school district? Is it on the political subdivision? So that, the failure of the filter system or the block system is something that we've been considering about, well, who would be culpable if something did get through if this law were to be in place. And so that kind of gives you an idea of what these two library bills are doing. And I anticipate we will see, like I said, at least one of them die and then the two be merged and see where it ends up. We've had conversations with the governor's office about this bill, the transgender bills. He has not decided, he's very tight-lipped. He's not going to let us tip his hand about what he would consider vetoing or not at this point. It's much too early for him to make any commitments. But based on his track record in the past, there is some hope that cooler heads would prevail when it comes time to sign some of these bills that just may not be workable in real life.
Has the criminal penalty been stripped up?
Let me check here.
I had heard it was, but when I'm reading it, it doesn't look like it.
Let me bring this. I'd like to say that I memorized all the amendments that came through on these bills, but there's a few of them. I don't see the criminal penalty in either of them anymore.
Okay.
Other questions?
We saw in the House approval voting was voted down, and we've talked to Senator Kristen Rohrs. She seems very much against the approval voting. Seven-person judicial committee that would look into that. What would you say the mood of the Senate will be on this?
I think that this is it's a damning committee for this bill to end up in for the city. There's no way to sugarcoat it. When you look at the makeup of the Senate Judiciary Committee and where they're from, it's going to take a lot of work for them to come around and see things, in our way. The one thing that I think we need to rest our laurels on at this point is the fact that this was something that was decided by the voters, and this is local control. And because there are several people that, while they may not agree with this and would never want it in their city, would respect the fact that this is local control. And I personally have engaged the members of Senate Judiciary at this point, but I think that based on how they voted on things in the past, that's really the shot that we have. The problem we're going to run into is the fact that the amendment was stripped off on the House floor. And so if we were to get that amendment placed back onto the bill, it's going to end up in conference committee. And I mean, best case scenario, they can't agree and the bill dies. But it's also possible, depending on how big of a fight it is, that they just say, fine, we'll take the amendment back off again. So this one's going to require some work. I mean, that's something that I'm going to gauge and see where we're at and see where our possible leverage points are. But I would call 1273 the biggest fight that the city will have during the second half.
We have a big issue with our project, the Red River Valley Water Supply. And part of the concern I have is not to taint the discussion, get mad at us for a huge fight on the approval voting, and then decide, well, screw you, we're going to screw you on that as well. Right now, it's come out of the House with a good number. 175 may go to 200. Seems like it's on the right path, got a good vote out of the House. Just curious, if we meddle too much on this next part of the session, because Fargo's always viewed a little bit as, right, we're special or something, right? Or east versus west.
You're the most special city in the state, as far as I'm concerned.
So I just ponder, who we bring on the board. So we talked about earlier today that League of Women Voters voiced into it with a letter to the editor. The chamber could get involved. Could we get other people involved? Mike Redinger went to a Rotary Club the other day. They wanted to get involved. So it's just how much do we push that fight if it looks like no matter what we do, it's going to get through the Senate.
I am glad you brought that up because it's a great point. 2020 is in really good shape as it stands right now. And we're, when the budget forecast comes out, which, Rocky probably knows the numbers better than I do, but we could see even, an increase to that 175 right now. The intent language looks good as well. And you're absolutely right that you don't want to provoke any legislators to think, oh, Fargo, what are they doing? But when it comes to the voting bills, I think that if you were to come up strong with the voting bill, they would rather see you standing up for that than some of the policy bills. Just in the eyes of the legislators, they would rather see you stand up for your voting system as opposed to, say, the transgender bills, the library bills, those things that are more hot button issues. That's not to say you should not fully engage with the grassroots portion of it, though. If Rotary clubs and chambers and private industries want to get involved and there's something that you can do to say absolutely, I think that is a place to do so. But you are 100% correct that, it's what fights do you want to pick when 2020 is on such a good track right now? Because every legislator is human and they do get burnt out going into the second half. Not all of them made it to Arizona for a little R&R, so some of them are a little stressed out.
Just so the commission understands, is when we did the diversion, it was really hard to get the intent. We needed an intent of 870, and that was a huge battle. And the intent basically is an intent to fully fund you eventually, but not necessarily in that biennium. It can be over 4 or 5 bienniums. So Sorvag has got it to an intent at this early stage, which is fantastic. That really helps us to the full amount of money that the state should be putting in. So we're not short, we're not low. Typically they'll come in 75% or 80%, but he fully funded the intent, and that passed. And that passed without a number of bienniums. It's not declared 10, 8, 6. If they can come with money sooner, they can do it. So that's on this project, that's the best we've ever been. They've never committed more than 85, 100 million a year. So even get to 200 is a huge grasp because they rarely will do more than 100 a year. That's just, there's something inside them that puts a throttle on. So if you look at it from our perspective of the Red River Valley water supply, we're in the best position we've been in for a long time. Plus might get some more. So we'd asked for 255. It just isn't in the cards with all the other projects on there, but we'd be very happy with 175 or 200. That would be a huge step forward.
So for supportive infrastructure, we have to sell our souls
Not exactly,
and
John.
our values and our principles and our support of human beings.
You can still support those things,
And why
but you
can't
don't
they?
have to go against the bills. You can support
Why
those.
can't our legislators support human beings and human rights? I mean, are we being bribed? Is that what it is?
Not at all. I think that it's important to think about, the roles of the cities and the roles of the other moving parts like the chambers and things like that. And I know that it would be great if the city could weigh in on everything, but there is a lot of strategic thought that needs to go into where things lie. And the chamber does a great job of saying we support our businesses, and if we want people coming in to live in these communities, we need to treat humans in a certain way.
So they think this is workforce development that'll work?
Which one?
All of these human rights bills, the trans bills, the homophobic bills, the library bills, the censorship bills, do they think this will help us draw people to North Dakota?
I think that there is a subset of the legislator that thinks that this will draw people into the state. Yes, the theme of the legislature is workforce this session, and there are a lot of freshmen there and a lot of very conservative voices there that think that this is what will bring more people into the area. Yes.
Some people.
Yes.
If I can say something here too, I truly believe that, so we've been hearing this, we've got to be careful with how we approach this legislature because we're looking for funding. We've been hearing that for 10 years, probably more, with a diversion as well. The trouble is, we have a legislature this time around that's a lot more radical. And one of the major concerns on my part is local control. And if we don't take a good hard stand on this one, what's the next local control issue? So to me, that's just as important probably as funding for infrastructure. I argue this blanket statement that because we're looking for 175 million, we can't do anything else, in my mind, is off balance.
Yeah, this definitely goes back to the point that, especially when we're looking at the local control for the voting, if you're going to take a stand on something, that's the one to do it on, because it is local control.
But I also have to agree, we have an employment issue. And I can't imagine any other body, organized body in this city. I would imagine the chamber won't take a position on that either. So somebody has to speak up, in my mind.
Chamber has agreed that it's a workforce issue and is lobbying against these bills, so they have taken that stand. As far as local control, we have to say something.
Yeah.
It's our
Yeah.
way of voting. So what we're trying to strategize is how hard to come at it, and that's what we'd like to do. Is we'd like to have other people, not just the city of Fargo. It has to be other people in the community that stand up for that way of voting. And John, to your point, local control has always been an argument. We can't do gloves, or what was it, plastic bags? They outlawed plastic bags just because the rumor we might do that one day, and it's ridiculous. We had nothing in our ordinance, we had nothing in our ways, but we thought sometime in the future, the Sustainability Committee may come up with some issues that we feel that we should take a stand on. So, yes, we have to be very careful, but the local control issue, I think we need to stand up hard on that one. We may lose, but I'm hopeful in the courts will win on that one, but we'd have to make our objections. And help me understand it. I think it's what Ben Koppelman put out there. It's one vote. You're diluting one vote system. Seems to put that out there, but on our plurality voting, on the last election with 2 commissioners in position, people on average voted for 2.5. So we didn't vote for 5 or 6 people. It was only 2.5. In the mayor's race, it was 1.5. So it wasn't like you diluted your vote 5 times. So I don't know if we educate a little more or try to come from it, or you argue stronger. It's just this is a local control issue, and like every city in the state, we should be allowed to make our local decision.
I think it's both, because Representative Koppelman does do a good job of conflating the two. He gives his examples, and if you're not familiar with the concepts on the front end, and you're just listening to him talk about these situations that have occurred, and he uses the example out of Alaska and things that are not happening in North Dakota quite often. I've heard him say that quite a few times in the way that he explains it, is the situation in Alaska with their Senate race. And so in order, education is important, and then also I think the local control is going to be imperative there as well.
Well, but just to understand, the Alaska issue was rank voting, wasn't approval voting.
Right, but
And
since
the
they're in the
candidate
same
he
bill,
wanted to win lost, so he blames it on rank voting, and by the way, approval voting as well. But
Right.
he cannot give any good example in the city of Fargo where approval voting didn't vote in the candidate got the most votes. So it's.
I just think it's clear that he probably didn't vote for you during the last election, Mayor. It's true, though, because there's both of those issues tied together in one bill. It's hard for these people where this is a foreign concept to them to separate the two, because they're lumped together in that same bill. And so I think that education would go a long way, but I really think that the local control is what we need to hammer in on this one.
So, this whole issue of strategy, I don't know where the discussions are happening about strategy, but I think that needs to be opened up a bit, and the discussion needs to happen at this table.
That's the point of today. This is a strategy today. This is the idea what Mike had, is have her speak with us and then have us figure out what we want to do.
One other thing I will mention as well is who you're seeing testifying during the committee meetings and the testimony that you see submitted. in the legislative website is not everything. I mean, you've got, especially in North Dakota, the chambers will come in and they will oftentimes put themselves on the record, but then oftentimes they're soft lobbying in the background as well. And you see that a lot with larger businesses as well. I am a contract lobbyist. I have several companies that are national companies, and they say, yeah, we just want to take a softer approach to this. And so I will be lobbying on their behalf for issues that are going through committees without ever putting anything on the record. And that's just something that's impossible for me to show you guys on a day-to-day basis, because we're 3 hours apart. So that is happening there as well, and you see that a lot on these more controversial bills. We've got a supermajority of Republicans in the state. Obviously, the larger corporations don't want to really make either side mad, but they know where they stand.
Yeah.
So if they talk one person, one vote, do they not recognize 30-some thousand votes count too?
Right.
How can people discount a vote of the biggest city in the state and an overwhelming supportive vote? How can they even begin to have that conversation with a conscience?
And they completely, if you go back and look at the floor debate where they stripped off the amendment as well, it was just glossed over. The entire origin of the voting system was glossed over when they did so.
So do they despise Fargo?
I don't think they despise Fargo, but you are the largest city, and it's something different. It's something different, and they've never seen it before, and so there's some trepidation.
Do they not realize all of our people almost come from all their little towns?
Right.
I'm serious. We're all made up of all those towns. And we need our Fargo residents to understand that their hometown leaders and some of our own local leaders are stripping their votes and their voices away.
I'd agree with that.
That's on the approval voting thing, and I haven't got, but that's just so egregious. A question I have then in that lane is, we routinely all the time see the state set us up to spend millions and millions suing the federal government over some issues. How many issues are you seeing this year where we're pitting ourselves up into a fight where we'll have legal issues with the feds on behalf of the state? Because some of these issues beg federal litigation.
That question may have been easier to predict during last session when Wayne was still here. I think that Drew is possibly more litigious than Wayne will be. He completely different type of attorney general. So I can't really give you much insight on how he's going to operate about some of these laws that are coming through, but I think it is possible that we'll see that.
Is there anything precluding us from going down those paths like they do with the federal government?
I'd have to defer to Nancy on that one. I don't know what it would take for you guys to sue the state on behalf
Of our people.
Right. I don't know the logistics of that, and I would hate to put my foot in my mouth more than I'm sure I'm already going to do today.
Can you talk a little bit about your role in regards to, even taking an example of the funding for the water supply project? Can you just walk us through what your involvement was with that?
Sure. The funding, I'm going to be upfront and let you know, I also represent the Garrison Diversion. So I'm the lobbyist for the Garrison Diversion. So I'm working both roles there. And so Rocky and I actually spend a lot of time on the phone together talking about this. And so I'm the conduit in Bismarck. So when something needs to be done, there was, for example, a slight math, I wouldn't call it an error, there was a typo, and we needed to get a number changed, a $14 million number changed. And so since I'm in Bismarck, I was able to go and sit behind the Senate chamber and wait for Sorvag to get done so I could talk to him and get this thing changed. So I'm the person on the ground in Bismarck talking to specific legislators about issues, gathering feedback from committees before they happen to see if we can gauge where things are going to end up, seeing if the legislators need any more information about the topics before they end up in their committee, because they don't have any staff. And so oftentimes the legislators will directly rely on the lobbyists to get them more information. And so we act as that conduit back and forth. My client sends information they want to get to the legislators, and the legislators ask for information, and I get that from my clients. And so that's the 35,000 foot level of what my job entails.
And then it's also strategy. Arlette was asking a little bit about that. So When we come out there, we brought Mary Dardis, we brought Mary Boshinsky, we testified, you prepared our stuff, and we had everything ready. We have handouts, and then basically, Rocky's help as well, we make corrections if there's misunderstandings. And typically, Senator Sorbach will say, well, what about this or what about that, has questions that he doesn't want to take the time of the committee to do at that time, but we'll take it later. So her job is to make sure there's clear clarification of all the different elements that there are questions about. And then when that team walks away, it's tracking and seeing what's happening. So Sorbach had a meeting, took testimony, and then the next week he figured out the budget, and he openly talked about that. At that meeting, we don't get to testify, but we have to make sure he's got the right story, which he did. And plus, he figured some things out.
And to that point, too, since I'm able to be in Fargo, there's several of these policy bills that happen, like 1340, I think, is the gun bill number. And as soon as the cameras go off and that committee hearing is over, you hear legislators saying, well, how are we going to fix Fargo? How are we going to fix Fargo? Because that one was squarely a target on Fargo after the court case, and they wanted to change this so that you couldn't have that ordinance anymore for the FFLs. So it's having someone in the room who knows which legislator is most likely going to bring these amendments, who's got an issue with what's going on. And 99% of the time, they are not from Fargo. It's from different parts of the state. And so having somebody in the room who can communicate that back so we can come up with some discussion points and information and education that's needed.
1340 is our issue with gun sales in neighborhoods where we have a handful or more of businesses that aren't allowed in our neighborhoods, like mortuaries, adult entertainment, kennels, mechanics and car dealers, and that and guns. That's the issue, right?
Yes.
So what's their defense of how are we going to explain we want to allow more people? They call it a Second Amendment right. What's the Second Amendment right to having assault rifles more than we have already in our neighborhoods, even near our schools? What's the benefit of that? How is that a Second Amendment right?
I think that we can look at a nationwide purview of how the Second Amendment is interpreted and see that there are several states who take a wide-ranging viewpoint on that. I don't disagree with you at all, but the Second Amendment is often stretched to encompass things.
When we celebrate guns everywhere, guns in every crowd, guns in every space almost, do we not acknowledge what's happening in the country with the mass shootings? I mean, can we not acknowledge the reality of that trend in our country and the deleterious effects to people and children in schools? I mean, how can they not know what's going on?
Again, I don't disagree with you. And if, I can't tell you what their point of view is on it. We've got ex-law enforcement on some of these committees that have a different viewpoint where I don't know if they think that everybody who has a gun in North Dakota is a responsible gun owner. I mean, it takes all different kinds, right? The citizen legislature. And so I think there are people who probably are under the impression of it won't happen here. And,
Let them come to the microphone when it does.
Right.
To me, this is another local control issue.
Absolutely.
It is.
And we should be taking a very strong stand on this one.
Just for clarification, is Ben Koppelman behind that bill as well?
Yes, that is. Yep.
Yes.
That one is also.
And some Fargo legislators, aren't there at least one?
Yep. Andrew Marshall is on that one. So that's prime sponsor is Koppelman, and then Claire Corey from Grand Forks, Andrew Marshall, Corey Mock, Schatz, and then Senators Clemens, Larson, Doug Larson, Scott Meyer, Paulson, Christian Roars, and Wabama. Those are the sponsors of that bill. Now, this bill was amended to kind of, I don't want to say mirror because there was a couple of differences, but to resemble the Bismarck city ordinance where it would still allow the city control over, you can't have the guns, guns, guns sign in the yard and things like that. So you can regulate it to that degree, but you would have to allow them as long as there's no other issues going along with it. So that bill was amended, and that's something, this is an interesting one because the League of Cities is not taking a strong stance on this one because there are so many little, the varying sizes of the League of Cities and their members. They aren't going to stand up on this one. So that is something that if the city of Fargo wants to weigh in on it, that's something that should be discussed amongst the members here.
So we haven't at this point.
What have we done on it? I think we've objected to it, yes.
Yeah.
We put testimony in or not?
Mike Redlinger submitted testimony.
Good.
I mean, we went through the process of suing on this issue. I would hope we would take a strong stand.
Yes, correct. The city attorney's office developed some really good testimony. So Ian McLean submitted that on behalf of the city. So that was registered.
And what
Mike,
other
can you just come back
activities?
up? How does he get around, I mean, we went to court and we won. How does he get around that with this bill? Is there something different in this bill that can keep him so he can get it?
I can't speak to the legal specifics about how they get around it, quote unquote, but yes, it is a new, unique bill. And so it warranted enough attention that we thought we really wanted to develop some good testimony. And I thought that the written testimony that Ian developed is really, really sound. I mean, it was very well put together, very thoughtful. And so we can pull that up and I can send that around quickly here if you'd like to see that again. But it is unique again this year in the way in which they put it together. So.
Can I just say something here? I have heard this from multiple legislators. They don't read those. So a submitted testimony in writing doesn't do a whole lot. So my question would be, how do we engage the lobbying firm on this particular issue?
I think that you do see when it comes to a whole body. I would challenge and say that the people sitting in the committee are reading the testimony that's submitted. But when the issue gets to the entire floor, yeah, most of that testimony is not read.
I have heard this from a Judiciary Committee member, that members in her own committee don't read them.
I don't, I have a lot of conversations for 40 plus hours a week, and I have not come into a situation where I mention a piece of testimony and they say, I've never read that in committee. So I guess I can't speak to that if that is happening. As far as engaging the lobbyist, if that's something, that you want to do, is the city as a whole wants me to engage with each individual person. We've got some education to do. We have, we've just got to start that. I mean, that's the direction that you give me, and I will do so.
Yes.
The city weighs in on a lot of different bills. The auditor puts in testimony on things. The police chief puts in testimony. Give me my marching orders, and I will absolutely do that, Commissioner.
We need to do that, Mayor.
I think this one's important enough.
Yeah, I agree. This is a local control issue, and certainly support, taking that tact. I just want to, say also, remind folks that we're at crossover, and so we have another half of the session. We'll be monitoring these bills and watching what happens to them. The city has shared with all of us the priority bills that we have been tracking and the progress each week that we get from the League of Cities as well. Certainly an advocate of local control, and we need to be strong on those bills that have that tenet. Regarding the policy bills and the position the city is going to take, working with the chamber to get their testimony and their support. We've been talking about having citizens come to the next city commission meeting and speak about the concerns on some of the policy issues to the city commission as well. But it's certainly absolutely 100% is a workforce issue. And so if as a city commission we want to draft something for the next meeting and bring it for consideration as a workforce issue, I think, that's appropriate. And I think we're going to have to figure out the process for which to do that process. But, lots going to change in the second half. I would like to ask a question, if I may, about childcare. I know that there's a couple remaining bills. In general, my understanding is that there's going to be some consolidation between, it's going to eventually go to appropriation, but certainly the consolidation of the tax child exempt credit, as well as some subsidies to child cares and some infrastructure. So can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, there is absolutely, I mean, these bills they're going to be rolled into one package. When we started, there were a dozen bills out there addressing childcare. And with Commerce kind of leading the helm on a lot of that, there is going to be one package, but the final details have not yet been determined. And most of that's because we need our final budget forecast before they make any final decisions on amounts. And so I would anticipate by the end of March, we will see that. And you're absolutely right. It's going to be the child tax credit. There's going to be grant program or loan programs, however the final version looks for actual providers as well. And there's also going to be some education and training opportunities for people that may want to get into childcare too. And so I think that we'll see a couple of different moving parts in the final package, but I don't know what all of that looks like at this point either.
But I think it's fair to say there's still support for some real solutioning in childcare, and childcare is being recognized as a workforce issue as well.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that there are several legislators that want to be kind of part of championing that, because there's so much unpleasant stuff that happens during every legislative session that this one is kind of a win for everybody.
Can you give us a little bit of background? Because these childcare bills have been repeatedly introduced, and for some reason they're moving forward this time. Is it because the governor is so strongly behind it, or what's going on?
We've got some money this session. That's what a lot of this boils down to, is the fact that the funding is there. They've finally studied this issue in every possible way that they could have over the last few legislative sessions, and we've got a strong Commerce department behind it now as well. Commerce has really taken the lead and said, all right, we've got the information that's been cultivated by legislative management over the last few sessions, and we're going to kind of take the helm here. So it's kind of that perfect storm of something good happening.
If I could just clarify too, I did look up House Bill 1340 back on the home occupation matter. So the last registry there is that the Senate received it on 2/21, but as you've seen in front of you in the committee hearings that have been scheduled, has not been scheduled yet in the Senate. But as soon as that happens, we will certainly engage on that as well. So.
It has not been assigned to a committee yet either, but I assume it will be going to judiciary. We could try and get it into a different committee, but I don't know, thinking if it's ENR that it's going to be in a, right. I don't think that would be any better spot with Patton, Magrum, and those folks that sit on that committee.
Anything else?
Questions, airing of grievances?
We had 2 years ago, we had an individual, for his own reasons, some sort of a protest, I guess, show up in god-awful drag. Will we have to arrest those folks down the road?
I don't know the answer to that.
Is that what they want us to do?
I believe that the intent would be if there are children present on some of those bills. I can't answer for sure the mechanics of how that portion of it would work without sitting down and doing that analysis with the current version that the bills are in. I think that a lot of this stemmed from there was a national movement in public libraries to have story time with drag, or whatever the title was. And I know that this happened in a few different states, and it caused a big outrage with some of the conservatives that there was anybody dressed in drag reading a storybook to a child. Even though they were fully clothed, it was just such an affront to them that this is kind of how that movement started. And I think that's how the drag got lumped in with the library portion of it so quickly, is because this did happen in some isolated areas in the country.
Yet when people talk hate crimes, they say, oh, there are no hate crimes in our state. There's no people being discriminated against. That doesn't happen here. But why does drag all of a sudden become a problem that they're worried about? Is that happening here any more than critical race theory or some other things?
Right. The only time I've ever seen a drag show in North Dakota is in an adult venue. I personally have never seen it in an area where children are there. But I can't speak to the mechanics of exactly what it
So
would.
here in City Hall, you're on television in a public meeting, we'd probably have to call the police.
It seems the only way this ridiculousness is going to be portrayed is to start arresting people and actually charging them. That might have some kind of influence on this. Crazy.
You're getting the sense that, you know, I understand the delicacies of working for valid, legitimate, viable, important issues like infrastructure. I understand that completely. But I will not compromise my values about human beings and about all human beings and about people who are targeted and marginalized and singled out and who don't have life easy as it is. Why do they care about anybody who's trans? Do they know anything what they're talking about? Maybe they should learn without doing damage and harm. Then they'll go to another session and they'll talk about our escalating suicide rates and ideation of self-destruction, and then they don't see their own role in this. They don't know how we're piling on and contributing to people's lack of self-esteem and making it more difficult to survive even in this state. I just don't get it. If these folks don't have children, if they don't have family members, if they don't have neighbors and friends, if they can't find anybody that cares or understands it or says, just back off, don't do harm, they're not looking very hard.
Yeah, again, I don't disagree with you at all. I think that, you know, in some instances from some of our more rural areas, it would be hard pressed for somebody to find somebody, you know, in their inner circle that would be able to share those experiences with them. So there is a level of, you know, ignorance because they've never been exposed to differing viewpoints before. My job, obviously, as your lobbyist, is to make sure that I convey the city's wishes going forward. So if that's something that you'd like to do, you know, as a body, I'll take my marching orders, as I said before.
Well, we know where I stand. I don't want us to compromise our values that support individuals that don't have voices, that we need to stand with them and have their backs. We need to support the families and their children. That's where I'm at. You know, if they're going to keep us from getting water over human rights issues, that's on them. And good luck getting people to move to this state.
I just think for reference, what you need to know is that when we had the hate crime ordinance come up in the commission, we had great testimony by a lot of people that kind of showed us what is going on in our community. And so Commissioner Strand is very passionate about it, but he's heard from those people and they're frightened. And we do not want to have a community that frightens people away. We want a community that embraces people. And it's interesting because rural sites use site as well, but people are having trouble getting workforce all over the state. And if we drive people out of the state, it doesn't help. And we're talking about just the different people in employment right now. And it goes to Cardinal, it goes to different places. We're getting all sorts of different people coming into our community. And our community's been enriched by that. We've had great things happen because of that. So Commissioner Strand's passion on this isn't, I mean, we should take a stand for people who are being marginalized. And I can see us doing that. And it puts you in a little bind, but no, we don't stand for many of these bills. Tim Dirks is doing the library, and he's done great testimony on that, but it seems just bizarre. If I wanted to get an anatomy book, that might be considered obscene right now, and it's like crazy. It just, why, you know, allow me to read what I need maybe for my profession or something else, but it's difficult when we do, as a state, start to look out there. And Denise and I were just talking about the video or impact of social media and just what it does in the world nowadays. Of if we look silly as a state, then what it does to us as a standing throughout the state. And it's just frustrating as a city when we're trying so hard to attract people to our community to then be portrayed as not caring or intolerant or something else like that.
To that point as well, I think in a lot of these policy bills, that the legislators don't get good examples of who this is actually impacting. So the grassroots movement is extremely important, and especially to educate some of these legislators that, you know, what you said, they aren't looking hard for somebody that this impacts. Well, those people aren't showing up to the committees. They're not submitting their own testimony. They aren't putting forth a well thought out argument and showing up for video testimony. With few limited examples. I mean, you do see it a little bit, but the grassroots movement is so important when we come to subjects where there is a lack of education for the very, you know, rural legislators compared with city legislators.
They're terrified. Who would show up and put themselves at that sort of a risk with the dynamic that's unfolding as it is? Who would do that? Nobody in their right mind, except a few really, 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 and I celebrate those courageous folks that stand up and the pain they must go through.
Yeah, it's, I, again, won't disagree with you on that. It comes down to, the people standing in the room often have the biggest impact. And so testifying in person is obviously always better than testifying by video in North Dakota. And testifying in general is always better than not saying anything. So even submitting written testimony is better than nothing when it comes to the grassroots. And I understand what you're saying, but if there's any encouragement that can be done for that grassroots movement, it's very important in this state.
When you have folks that are saying we don't even want RNA COVID vaccines, how are we going to get them to listen to science and data? How are we going to get them to understand that as many as 4% of every baby, all babies born, have some sort of gender identity anomaly? It's 1 in 25.
We're also going to find ourselves in a situation where our education is going to have to start to be cyclical now that we have term limits. And we're going to be reinventing the wheel as we move forward over the next sessions as we term out a whole lot of our legislators here in 8 years.
And that's one of the reasons they're thinking of going to annual sessions, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes. Mike, you want to do any closing comments?
Well, I just want to thank Terry for her comments today and presenting to the commission. Really appreciate all of the efforts that she and Matt and Stephanie at the North Dakota League are really are doing on our behalf in Bismarck. It's really important to have that boots on the ground, and so she does a great job, and just really appreciative of that. We'll continue to share the weekly updates. We'll be back on for a Friday legislative update with the North Dakota League, and we'll continue to monitor that. In addition, with the league staff, the Olson Efforts team, and our staff. If there are other bills that come up here over the next couple of weeks, we'll be sure to let you know. Just checked 1273 again, still no committee hearing on that in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So as soon as we get some more information on that, we'll be sure to let the commission know. But appreciate the time today. Thank you for
One last comment, Terry and Michael and team. I don't want to assume anything, but when we advance positions, we're not just talking the legislature. We're also talking the governor's office. That's one of the 3 branches of government who does have the authority to maybe do some action that we might embrace. So it's not just the legislature.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for your time today. I will see you all at the end of session.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.